The courtroom was silent except for the sound of an old wooden clock ticking on the wall. Every tick echoed like a countdown, and all eyes were fixed on the frail woman sitting in the defendant's chair. Her hair, once auburn, had faded into a soft silver. Wrinkles carved deep lines across her face, each one telling a story of pain, survival, and sacrifice. Her name was Helen Whitaker, and after 27 long years, she was about to hear the words that would decide if she would live her final years in freedom or behind iron bars. The judge cleared his throat, papers shuffled, and just as he prepared to deliver his decision, the doors of the courtroom swung open. Two men walked in, both tall, both carrying themselves with quiet confidence. The crowd turned to see who they were, but Helen already knew. Her eyes welled with tears the moment they stepped forward. Those two men were once the little boys she had taken in nearly 3 decades ago when the world wanted nothing to do with them. And now, they were here, not just as witnesses, but as the only ones who could stop the life sentence hanging over her. But to understand how it all came to this moment, we need to go back to where it began, in the fall of 1998, on a cold street corner in a small town in Tennessee. Helen was 50 years old back then, living alone in a modest house at the edge of town. Her husband had passed away years earlier, and her only son had moved across the country to start a new career. Life had grown painfully still for her. She filled her days with gardening, volunteering at the church, and baking pies for the neighbors. She never imagined her life would take a turn that would bind her forever to 2 children she had never met before. That evening, she was driving home from the church pantry, where she had been handing out canned goods. The streets were nearly empty, the streetlights casting long shadows. That's when she saw them, 2 little boys, no older than 6 or 7, huddled together on the corner of Cedar Street. They weren't dressed for the weather, their thin jackets offering no protection against the biting chill. Helen pulled over, rolled down her window, and called out, "Hey there, are you two all right?" The boys looked up, their eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. The older one, with sharp eyes and a guarded stare, didn't answer right away. He pulled the younger one closer, as if shielding him from a stranger. The smaller boy, though, spoke softly, "We're cold." Helen's heart clenched. She could have driven away, told herself it wasn't her problem. But something inside her wouldn't let her leave. She got out of the car and walked slowly toward them. "Where are your parents?" she asked gently. The older boy finally spoke. "We don't have any." His voice was steady but carried the kind of weight no child should ever have to bear. Their names were Andre and Darius. They had been bouncing between relatives and foster homes after their mother died, and no one wanted to keep them together. That night, they had slipped away from yet another temporary placement where they felt unwanted. They had nowhere to go, no one to take them in. Helen knew the risks, knew what people would say about an older white woman taking in 2 black boys she'd just met. She knew the system might not make it easy. But looking at them, skinny, scared, and shivering, she couldn't walk away. She took them home. At first, it wasn't easy. Andre didn't trust her. He had seen too many promises broken, too many adults give up on him. He watched her carefully, never letting his guard down, ready to leave at the first sign that she didn't want them anymore. Darius, on the other hand, warmed up quickly. He loved the smell of her baking, the sound of her humming old hymns while she worked in the kitchen. Helen threw herself into giving them the stability they never had. She enrolled them in school, made them sit at the dinner table every night, and read them stories before bed. She was learning just as much as they were, learning what it meant to be a mother again, learning what it meant to raise boys who were growing up in a world that didn't always welcome them. There were challenges, plenty of them. Some neighbors whispered. People in town asked why she would take in kids like that. At school, Andre got into fights when other children mocked him or his brother. Helen went to every meeting, every principal's office visit, and defended them fiercely. She told the boys over and over, "You are not alone. You're mine now, and I'm not letting anyone take that from you." For the first time in their lives, the boys believed someone truly meant those words. But behind the warmth of that new family was a shadow Helen never spoke about. A mistake from her past, one she thought was long buried. 20 years earlier, in desperation after her husband's death and facing foreclosure, she had made choices she wasn't proud of. She had gotten involved with the wrong people, and while she never physically hurt anyone, her name had been tied to a crime that remained unsolved for decades. She had escaped the consequences back then, but deep down, she always feared it would come back to haunt her. And it did. In 2023, just when Helen thought she could finally rest in the comfort of the family she had built, the authorities came knocking. Evidence from the past had resurfaced, and suddenly, the life she had built was collapsing. The boys, now men, watched in disbelief as the woman who had saved them was handcuffed and taken away. The charges were serious, and because of her age, a guilty verdict meant she would spend the rest of her life in prison. Andre and Darius knew the truth. Helen was not the woman the prosecution was painting her to be. Yes, she had made mistakes, but she had also saved their lives, raised them, and given them love when no one else would. They couldn't stand by and watch her be condemned without fighting back. And that's how they ended up walking into that courtroom 27 years later, determined to speak the truth that could set her free. The whole courtroom turned as Andre cleared his throat and said firmly, "Your Honor, we need to be heard." The judge paused, surprised, and nodded slowly. "Proceed." Helen's hands trembled as she looked at them. Tears blurred her vision, but her heart swelled with a hope she hadn't dared to feel in months. Because those little boys she had taken in all those years ago were no longer helpless children. They were strong, determined men. And they had come to repay a debt of love she never asked for but always gave. Andre stepped forward first. He wore a dark suit, his broad shoulders filling the space, and yet there was a trace of the small boy Helen had once found trembling in the cold. His voice carried across the courtroom, steady but weighted with emotion. "Your Honor," he said, locking eyes with the judge, "before you decide this woman's fate, you need to know who she really is. Because the Helen Parker the prosecution is describing is not the woman we grew up with. She's not the woman who saved us." The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Reporters scribbled furiously into their notepads, and even the jury leaned forward, intrigued. Darius followed him, standing slightly behind but equally determined. He said, "We wouldn't even be alive today if it wasn't for her. The system failed us over and over again. Relatives didn't want us. Foster homes split us apart. But Helen, she gave us something no one else ever did. She gave us a home." The judge raised a hand. "Gentlemen, I will allow you to speak, but remember this is a criminal proceeding. Keep your words focused on the case." Andre nodded. "That's exactly why we're here. Because the truth about this case isn't just about evidence on paper. It's about the kind of life she's lived since then. People change, Your Honor. And if you'll let us, we'll tell you how." Helen buried her face in her hands. She hadn't wanted them involved. She feared their reputations would be tainted by association with her mistakes. But hearing them defend her filled her with a fragile, aching pride. The prosecutor rose from her table. "Objection. This is not character court. What matters are the charges, fraud, accessory to theft, and obstruction from 2 decades ago." But the judge, curious now, motioned for them to continue. "Go on." Darius took a breath, his hands tightening into fists at his side. "I was 7 years old when she found us. My brother was 8. We were cold, hungry, scared. She didn't know us, but she brought us into her home anyway. She fought for us when others mocked us, defended us when schools tried to label us. She showed us what family meant. If you're going to weigh her past, you have to weigh what she gave after it too." The room went silent. The jury was listening. Even the prosecutor looked uneasy. Andre glanced at his mother figure, then back at the judge. "She's not perfect. None of us are. But everything she did for us was out of love. She didn't just raise 2 kids, she raised men. I'm a teacher now. My brother is a paramedic. We both give back to this community because of her example. And I'm telling you, if you take her away for the rest of her life, you're punishing the wrong person. Helen could no longer hold back her tears. She wiped them slowly with trembling hands, her chest heaving as if every word pierced through the weight pressing down on her. The prosecutor rose again. Your Honor, while their testimonies are moving, they do not negate the evidence. Mrs. Whitaker was involved with a group who committed fraud in the 1980s. Her signature appears on forged papers. We can't excuse criminal behavior because someone did good deeds afterward. The words hung in the air. Helen's shoulders sagged. She knew those signatures existed. She couldn't deny the truth. She had signed papers back then, papers she didn't fully understand, but papers that tied her to the crime. The defense attorney, a younger man named Peter Grayson who had volunteered to represent her, rose and said, Your Honor, what the prosecution fails to acknowledge is context. Mrs. Whitaker was a widow, alone, at risk of losing her home. She was misled by people who preyed on her vulnerability. She was never the mastermind, never the one profiting. And for nearly 30 years, she has lived a life beyond reproach. There is no record of repeat offenses, no misconduct, only service and compassion. He gestured toward Andre and Darius. These men are living testimonies of her character. Without her, they'd likely be lost in the foster system, or worse. Instead, they became contributing members of society. Doesn't that prove redemption is possible? The judge leaned back, folding his hands. His gaze shifted from the attorney to Helen, then to the 2 brothers standing tall. The room seemed to hold its breath. Darius stepped closer, his voice breaking. She saved us, Your Honor. Please, let us save her now. Helen closed her eyes. That was the moment she realized how much they had grown, how deeply they had absorbed her lessons of love and loyalty. She had always feared they would resent her past, but here they were, using their voices, their strength, to carry her through it. The judge called for a recess. As the gavel struck, the courtroom erupted with murmurs. Helen was led out by an officer, her frail body barely able to keep up. But when she turned her head, Andre and Darius were there, watching her with unwavering eyes. For the first time since her arrest, she felt a sliver of hope. In the quiet of the holding room, Helen whispered to her attorney, They shouldn't have to do this. They've already given me more than I deserve. Peter shook his head. No, Mrs. Whitaker. They're not doing this because they have to. They're doing it because you gave them life. This is what love returns. Helen sat back, her heart heavy but full. She didn't know how the case would end, but one thing was certain, no matter the verdict, she had done something right. Back in the courtroom, the prosecutor prepared to bring forward the old evidence, and the defense planned to show letters, testimonies, and character witnesses. But the most powerful evidence had already been spoken, 2 men, once forgotten children, standing for the woman who had refused to forget them. And the fight was only just beginning. The final day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors, reporters, even old church friends of Helen's filled the benches. Some had come out of curiosity, others out of loyalty. Everyone knew the decision today would shape the rest of her life. The prosecutor presented the final piece of evidence, a faded ledger with Helen's handwriting. This, she said firmly, ties her directly to the crime. It doesn't matter how many good deeds came afterward. The law cannot simply forget. The defense attorney stood and replied, The law is meant to serve justice, not vengeance. Yes, she signed the papers, but under duress, without full knowledge, and without profit. And since that day, her life has proven one thing, she is not a criminal. She is a mother, a protector, and an asset to this community. Andre and Darius sat side by side, their hands clenched together. When the jury was sent out to deliberate, the room filled with tense silence. Minutes stretched into hours. Helen sat perfectly still, her thoughts racing. She prayed not for herself, but for the boys. That they wouldn't carry guilt if the verdict went against her. Finally, the jury filed back in. The foreperson stood. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant, not guilty. On the charge of accessory, not guilty. On the charge of obstruction, guilty, but with recommendation for leniency. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The judge raised his gavel, silencing the room. Given the circumstances, the defendant's age, her decades of good conduct, and the testimony of those whose lives she has profoundly changed, the court sentences Helen Whitaker to time served. She is free to go. The gavel struck. Cheers erupted, people clapped, some wept openly. Andre and Darius shot to their feet, tears streaming down their faces. They rushed to Helen, wrapping their arms around her fragile frame. She sobbed into their shoulders, whispering, "I thought I'd lost everything, but you brought me back." Andre held her tighter. "No, Mom. You gave us life when no one else would. It was our turn to give it back." For a long time, the three of them stood there, bound together not by blood, but by love stronger than any chain. In the weeks that followed, Helen returned home to her quiet house. But it wasn't so quiet anymore. Andre visited every weekend with his wife and little girl. Darius often stopped by after long shifts as a paramedic, bringing her fresh flowers and stories of lives he'd saved. The community that once whispered against her now saw her differently. They saw the truth, that a broken past does not define the future. Helen sat on her porch one evening, watching the sunset. The boys, her boys, were laughing inside, setting the table for dinner. She smiled, her heart full. She had once rescued 2 children. And 27 years later, those children had rescued her. Her story became a reminder to everyone in that small town, and beyond, redemption is real, love can outlast mistakes, and sometimes the family we choose is the family that saves us.